Welcome to Your Inspiring Garden, brought to you by the Joy In Spades blog. Join us on our journey to inspire people to find their happiness in gardening. Whether you have a few carefully chosen houseplants, a backyard garden, an allotment or small holding, or even acres of land, let's talk about what you have learned, your dreams for your space, and what inspires you. Let's get started. Here is your host, Heather Booth from Joy In Spades. Welcome to Your Inspiring Garden, brought to you by the Joy In Spades blog. Join us on our journey to inspire people to find their happiness in gardening. Whether you have a few carefully chosen houseplants, a backyard garden, an allotment or small holding, or even acres of land, let's talk about what you have learned, your dreams for your space, and what inspires you. Let's get started. Here is your host, Heather Booth from Joy In Spades.
Hello and welcome to the podcast Your Inspiring Garden from the blog Joy In Spades. Thank you very, very much for joining us. It's lovely to have you here. This is the first episode of this podcast, and so it's going to be just me this time, but I'll tell you a little bit about the format and how you can get involved as well. So the idea of this podcast is to ask the same 12 questions every week to different people about their garden space. That can be houseplants, that can be an outside garden, that could be a space where you grow your own vegetables, it could be an indoor garden, it can be whatever it is that to you is a garden, and it can be as small as you want, it can be as big as you want. The idea is to inspire other people to have their little bit of garden space as well, because for those of us who enjoy gardening, we know how much of a difference it can make to our well-being, to our health, to our happiness, and to how much joy we just have in general. So gardening is something really special, and to encourage others to do that is something that's really worthwhile doing, and that's why we're doing this. So like I said, it's the same 12 questions every week for everyone. Today, I'm going to answer those 12 questions for myself and for my own garden spaces. So to let you know what those questions are, just in case you're interested, they are: tell us about yourself. That's fairly self-explanatory. Tell us about your garden space. How long have you been working on it? What changes have you made? What is your garden inspiration? What's your favourite part of your garden? Who has most inspired your gardening style? What's the best piece of gardening advice you've been given? What's the best piece of advice you'd pass on? What would be your dream space? What long-term plans do you have? And what is the happiness that you find in gardening? What is your joy in spades? So these are the questions. I'm going to go through them myself now, and in future there will be a different guest every week. If you would like to take part, just go to joyinspades.com and click on podcast on the menu, and there's all the information there that you need in order to take part. And like I said, we would love to have you, whether you've got just one house plant that you really love, or whether you've got acres and acres of land. It doesn't matter. It's about inspiring everybody that they can have a little bit of joy in spades for themselves. So tell us about yourself. My name is Heather Booth. I am 41. I am British. I live in Yorkshire in England, and I love gardening. I blog at joyinspades.com and at myseasonaljoy.com. They are linked blogs. My Seasonal Joy is all about seasonal living and making the most of the season that you're in, seasonal celebrations, seasonal food, all this good stuff. And Joy in Spades is the gardening spin-off from that, because I was at the time putting so much gardening content into Seasonal Joy, it was kind of drowning everything else out, and I realised that because I love gardening so much, it needed to be its own separate blog. And then from there, this podcast has been born out of there as well. You can find me across social media at Joy In Spades, all as one word, obviously. So tell us about your garden space. My garden space, I have several. So I have four, I think, distinct spaces that I also talk about on the blog. We have a backyard space, which is very limited, and we're doing some big changes to that at the moment. It's very limited because it's only 3 metre by 3 metre, so it's a very small space, but we're trying to do some work on that at the moment, and there's some posts about that on the blog. We have a very small front tiered garden that we are making some changes to again this year, and that's covered on the blog too. But that's just very basic planting, and again is very small. That's probably about the same 3 metres by 3 metres, but because it's tiered, there's a little bit less accessible space to it. I have a big collection of houseplants. I do love my houseplants, and most of them I've inherited from other people, or they've been gifts. And then I have an allotment. And for those who are not British, an allotment is a piece of land that you rent, either privately or from the local council, along with a whole lot of other people, all in an area together. And you can use it to grow your own fruit and vegetables. Some places also allow you to keep livestock. The one that we have doesn't, but you can grow anything you want there for your own consumption. And it's a fairly small piece. I think ours is about 2 metres by about 20 metres, something like that. That might actually be bigger than it is, but it's a fairly small piece, but it's enough land for us to be able to grow the fruit and veg that we want to grow for ourselves, and we've had that for about 4 years now. So how long have you been working on it? So depending on the different things, so the backyard space, we've only fairly recently started working on that. It's a really dark area because it's behind the house, it's underneath a huge established sycamore tree, so it's very damp, it's very dark, it's very dull, it doesn't get any sun. And so it's not a space we've done anything with yet. So that's something that we're starting to work on, and we're starting to think of how we can utilize that space to make the most of it. So we're thinking about things like lighting and seating and planting that is happy in a dark and dull area. Front garden, we're trying to think of how to best use that space because it's quite small, but it does get the sun all day long. So we're starting to think about what we can do with that. That space we've had about 13 years, which is how long we've been in this house. And so we're starting to think what we can do with that. Again, we've only just started working on it now. It's been kind of left to just do its own thing. So that's fairly recently working on it. The allotment we've had for, I believe this is our 5th year. And we've made a huge amount of changes in that time, including adding in raised beds, adding in a shed and a greenhouse, and adding in an area that is hopefully going to be for cut flowers. And houseplant wise, how long have I been working on it? I think I've had houseplants since I was a child. They've always been something that's really interested me, back from the early days when I had things like air plants that were a little bit more unusual, right through to now when there's a collection of all sorts of different things. So for houseplants, for as long as I can remember. So what changes have you made? Like I said, for the backyard, not a great deal yet. We've drawn up the plans for what we want to do. We've not made changes there. For the front garden, we're still in the process of clearing that and starting to think what to do. However, we have made some changes. When we moved here 13 years ago, the front was pretty much all gravelled and there wasn't anything growing other than mare's tail, which is a nightmare weed to get rid of, and we haven't managed to get rid of it. And so we've put various different shrubs and plants in, most of which I've grown from cuttings because that's something I really enjoy doing. Changes to the allotment. The allotment itself was a big, just bare piece of land when we took it on, very overgrown, very covered in weeds. We chose to add in raised beds for it so that we could do square foot gardening, if you've read about that, maximising how much you can grow in a very small space. We added in a greenhouse and a shed, as I said. We added in a section at the top, which originally was fruit bushes and is now going to be a cut flower garden. And we added in things like paths and easy access in order to be able to use it as easily as possible. And for houseplants, the only change I think we've made is adding more. That's probably about it. So, what is your garden inspiration? I'm inspired by other people's gardens. I love seeing what other people have done. And I don't necessarily mean in terms of big, fancy gardens, even what people have managed to do in a very small space, pots that people have planted. I like walking around looking at what others have done. Same with the allotment. I like walking around the whole allotment site. I think there's nearly 60 plots on the site, and I like looking at what other people have done and seeing what they've been inspired to do, what they're doing differently, what's interesting about what they're doing, and also what I wouldn't like to do, because you can learn a great deal from that as well. So I do wander around having a look at what other people are doing. That's my garden inspiration, I think. I also like looking at gardening programs, gardening magazines, or just seeing what other people have done and what catches my eye, what excites me when I look at them, and what I think would make me happy and what I think would be translatable to the space that I've got. What's your favourite part of your garden? I think the allotment is probably my favourite gardening space that I've got. And my favourite part of the allotment is to sit in the greenhouse and look out at everything growing in the raised beds, especially if it's an evening and the sun is setting and I've done a lot of work on the allotment. I'm tired. I like to sit in the greenhouse, just relax for a moment, recover, muscles aching, feeling like I've done a really good job, filthy hands covered in mud and soil, and just look at it all and just look at how beautiful it is and just relax and feel like I've achieved something. I think that's my very favourite part of my garden. Who has most inspired your gardening style? So my love of gardening, I think, came from my grandma. My gran was very, very special to me, and she only had a very small space. She only had a balcony on her flat, which was about 1/2 meter by about 2.5 meters, very, very small space. But she did a huge amount with it because she attached pots to the side walls of it. She attached hanging baskets to the roof of it. She put planter tubs out, and she managed to squeeze a little chair in there so that when you were sat on the balcony, you could have been in the middle of a tropical jungle somewhere. You couldn't see anything else. You couldn't see the outside world. All you could see was plants, and she did so much with such a small space. And when you were inside and you looked out, again, all you could see was the plants. And she went for things that were colourful, and she went for things that she really loved. She wasn't bothered what other people thought of what she planted. She went for the things that she enjoyed and that brought joy to her. And that inspires me to kind of be a little bit more creative, a little bit different. The other thing that she inspired me with as well was taking cuttings and collecting seed pods. Always asking permission if it's someone else's plant, but never being afraid to take cuttings, take them home, put them in water, usually for her, or put them in soil and see if they do anything. If they don't do anything, nothing lost. If they grow into a new plant, then brilliant, you've got a new plant. And she's really inspired me to do that. But in general, she's been my inspiration to just make a lot out of a small space, and not be afraid to just be colourful and go for the things that you love. What's the best piece of gardening advice you've been given? Ooh, so probably the best piece of gardening advice is to take cuttings, to grow new plants for free. That's what it is. It's making new plants for free, and being able to fill your garden space in quite an easy way. And it's wonderful because it takes a little bit of time, it takes a little bit of patience, but there is such a feeling of satisfaction when you manage to do it. I have a beautiful hydrangea bush in my front garden that I grew from a cutting about 3 years ago. And I think I took about 7 or 8 cuttings, put them all in water. They all rooted. I potted them on, and they all failed bar the one that's in the garden. And so that putting that little bit of effort in, when I look at that plant now, it means a lot to me because I know how much work it took to do that, to nurture it, to have it in the house, and then slowly put it outside and have it grow on and pot it on and pot it on and eventually put it into the garden. So the best piece of garden advice I've been given would be from my grandma, which is that taking cuttings and taking the time and the patience to grow them on, it gives you free plants. And if you've seen a plant in someone's garden that you love, and they're willing to let you take cuttings from it, then to go for it, because if you've loved it in their garden, you're going to love it in your own garden as well. What's the best piece of advice you'd pass on? Probably to do just that, actually, to go and talk to people if they've got a plant that you love, and just say, I love your whatever it is, like the hydrangea. Would it be possible to have a cutting from it? Or if you're trimming it at some point, could I possibly have a couple of the pieces from it? Not to be afraid to ask, and just see. Same with seed pods as well, when it's seed time of year. Not to be afraid to say, could I possibly have a couple of those seed pods? That plant is beautiful, and I'd love to grow it myself. What would be my dream space? My dream space would be probably something bigger than I have now, and more space to grow more fruit and veg. It's something that I enjoy a lot. It saves us a great deal of money, and there's a lot of satisfaction in cooking and eating something that you've grown from seed. But the space that I've got at the moment is very limited. So my dream space would be something far bigger, but being content with what I have. The spaces I have, I do love. They are my dream spaces. And it's wonderful to plan and to come up with ideas to make them as lovely as possible. So I am pretty content with what I've got. And the only thing I dream of is just a little bit more, I think. So what long-term plans do you have? So my long-term plans for the backyard is to move the gate from where it is now and put in some decking, a pergola, some lighting, and make a space where we can sit out. I'd also like to put in some tropical planting, but because it's dark and it's colder and it's damp around there, I don't know what would work, and so I'm kind of exploring that. And I have done some blog posts about the backyard on the blog at joyinspades.com. But I want to make it so that when you're out there, a little bit like my grandma's balcony that I talked about, I want to make it where when you're out there in that space, all you can see is that space, all you can see is the planting there. You can't actually see the other houses and what other people are doing. I want to make it as much of a sanctuary as possible. That's the word I keep thinking of, is sanctuary. For the front garden, I want to make some kind of seating out there so that we can enjoy the sun. I love to read, and so I want to be able to have a little reading nook out there, and put some more colourful planting in, especially winter planting, because at the moment when it's winter and early spring, it's fairly bare out there. So long term, I want to put in some plants that will do well over the winter, and I want to put in lots of spring bulbs as well. I've not had much success with spring bulbs before. I planted 54 daffodils 3 years ago, and last year 4 came up, and this year 2 came up. So I need to get some more spring bulbs, and see what I can do there. Allotment wise is just to continue doing what we're doing. I like to grow more unusual things. I like to grow a lot of squashes and pumpkins. And so I want to look even more at utilising the space we've got, and trying more different varieties of things and different colours of things as well. Houseplant wise, at the moment, almost all our houseplants are in the living room and kitchen. I want to start exploring putting houseplants in other parts of the house as well. So they would be my long-term plans. What is the happiness you find in gardening? What is your joy in spades? The happiness that I find in gardening is just the satisfaction of achieving something. When you've grown something from seed, there's a great sense of satisfaction and achievement in doing that. And when you've nurtured a cutting and you've grown a plant from that, or when you've carefully looked after a plant that's not been doing well and you've managed to get it back to full health and to flowering and so on, there's a great deal of nurturing involved in gardening, but also a great deal of satisfaction when it goes well. And I think that's the happiness that I find, that joy in looking out and seeing that the work that you've done has done something. And that's the same whether it's a house plant that I've looked after and grown on, or whether it's something that I've cooked that I've grown from seed and I can remember planting those seeds, or whether it's sharing a gift of a plant with somebody else. It's just that satisfaction of having put in that work and having something to show for it at the end of it, that just gives me so much joy, as well as beauty of it as well. So that's my podcast interview. If you'd like to take part, I would love to hear from you. And like I said, if you go to joyinspades.com, there's a tab there for podcast, and there's a link for how to get involved. It's got all the information of how we would record a podcast. It's got all the information about how to get in touch with me, and it's got the 12 questions there so that you can start to think about your answers in advance if you'd like to do that. I would love to hear from you, and I would love to interview as many people as possible. Also, make sure you send in some photos as well, and all your different contact details for social media, because there will be a show notes page on the blog for each of these podcast interviews. And so you can share details of how people can follow you. I love following people on Instagram who've got garden space, allotment space, house plants, and so on. So I love seeing what everybody's doing. And so all those details can be put in those show notes, and so that people can find you and see what you're doing. So if you would like to be a part of this, please get in touch. That would be wonderful. I hope you've enjoyed this first episode, and I hope you'll join me again next week. Bye bye for now.